And there's Rick. Okay, I guess we're ready to start. Sometimes we have to hit all the buttons at the same time. My name is Ann Merchant, and I want to welcome you to this week's event, which we are calling Searching for Exolife. In real life and in stories, I think is our subtitle. So I guess if we're going to divide this up between real life and stories, I would get the real life and you would get the stories.
I get the made up stuff.
So, and why? Because you have to introduce yourself.
So my name is Rick Lovard. I am the program director of the Science and Entertainment Exchange, which is a program of the National Academy of Sciences.
Exactly. So we thought this was perfect timing for this event. I think a lot of people saw the stories in June that were all over the media, where the Pentagon had, I think, investigated 140 something reports of UFOs, and they could apparently reasonably explain all but one of them. But that doesn't mean that the search for extraterrestrial life is not serious business. In fact, there are a number of researchers and scientists who think about this, and the Academy actually has some reports on this topic. I did go look. I have to admit, I typed in alien and I got a lot of our immigration reports. So I think I had to be a little bit more specific with my search on the Academy's website. But we have a number of reports that we've done on this. We have an older one called Signs of Life Detection, Life Detection Techniques. So if you want to know how to do this, another one called An Astrobiology Strategy for the Search for Life in the Universe, and a much more recent one called Searching for Life Across Space and Time. So I think that, as I said, there's a lot of serious study going on about this, and I think today's conversation will certainly illustrate that. But as we also know, this is perfect fodder for film and television. It's one of my favorite genres. I'm a huge fan. I have a lot of these alien movies on repeat, and I just watched The Tomorrow War as my latest alien venture. So I'm sure that, Rick, we must get a ton of questions about aliens. I don't know how many, but it must be a lot.
Oh, now you're going to put me on the spot. I don't know exactly, but I can tell you that like aliens and space travel, astrobiology, all this stuff, this is just, Sachi and I call that an average Tuesday, basically. This is a very, very common thing for us. So if you do have questions about that, please do connect with us. But I do want to underline one other thing too. We love these sorts of stories at the Exchange, but I think today is also, and Tracy will get into this a lot more, but about mentorship and about intergenerational science, which I think is a really cool story in and of itself, and maybe a story that's undertold in Hollywood. So if you want to know a little bit about the Exchange, if you have a question about science, you're a writer, producer, storyteller in a mass media form of any kind, you can call us and we will connect you with someone who hopefully knows what they're talking about. We have done this over 3,300 times. On film, TV, documentaries, I like to say every Marvel film since Iron Man 2. So if you are a STEM professional and you have a question about science, if you are a STEM professional and you would like to hear from you, and if you're a storyteller, you have a question about science, give us a try, please. So I got to thank today's sponsor, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, without whom we would not be doing this event at all. Also, we get major funding from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. And I want to thank all the individual donors who have given this year, especially the people who gave to this event. Thank you so much. And that money goes right back into our programming. So thank you. Also want to thank Courtney, Ameche, Sachi, and Jeff, without whom we would not be doing these events either. And so today's event structure, you are going to hear from 4 speakers. And there will be no Q&A. So we apologize for that. But because we have 4 speakers, we want to give them as much time as possible to convey amazing stuff to you. Which gets me to my rabbit hole for the week. As we're planning this event, there's always something that catches my eye. And this week, it was a Wired article about a Cornell professor and an astronomer at the Hayden Planetarium who did a study of how aliens might go about the task of looking for us, which I thought was really interesting.
Turnabout is entirely fair play. And so my rabbit hole is the Antikythera device. This is one of those things that Google will tell you about if you search for evidence of alien life on Earth. And it is not, I believe that, but it is something that people pondered about. It was originally found in 1901, I think. And it's an ancient Greek Greek astronomical device. And only recently, and I read this article in Nature, and I think Sachi will put this in the chat, that a new group of scientists have tried to recreate this so that they can better understand what our understanding of the cosmos were back during ancient Greek times. So I highly recommend it. I've seen a working replica of one of those. It's pretty cool. All right, so we're going to get started with our event now. And so our job is to introduce Tracy Drain. Tracy, of course, is one of our most favorite people. Professionally, she is a flight systems engineer at JPL, but she has also got the biggest smile, the warmest heart, and the most energy. And so she is the perfect person for us to turn this over to. And we're going to let you take it away, Tracy.
Thank you, Anne. Hello, everybody. I'm actually here to just set the stage a little bit for Grace Fanson, who's going to be leading us through all of the interviews today. So Grace Fanson is an undergrad student at the Georgia Institute of Technology, studying physics with a focus in astrophysics. And she actually stumbled across an exchange event, one of the storytelling events a few months ago, and fell in love with just the very idea of the exchange and the whole exchange's mission to get science and technology professionals mixed up with people who are doing things in the entertainment industry. And so she wanted to figure out how to get more involved, and we handed her this little informal research project to do over the summer, letting her pick a theme, and she chose exobiology. How to go find out about what has been done in the media in the past. She's been reading books and watching movies and TV shows and talking to a variety of experts in the entertainment industry and also in science and technology to find out a lot of things in fiction and in reality about what's going on. And her project is culminating in today's event, which is going to have her go through actually 5 mini interviews. We made a little bit of a change near the end, which is going to cover that whole story arc from how exobiology and exolife has been depicted in the media in the past, to what some of the current science and technology elements are associated with those things. And we're going to culminate in a conversation at the end with a writer and how he is using science and technology infused into his work. So as Rick noted earlier, there is no final Q&A panel at the end. Please do stick around until the very end so you can hear all of the new and exciting things in each of those interviews. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Grace Fanson and let her have the first interview with George Bohrer.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm really grateful to be here and for this opportunity. I've had a really fun summer interviewing all of these people. So first, I would like to introduce Dr. George Bohrer. He is a retired communication and media professor at Fitchburg State University in Massachusetts, where he taught over 30 years. He often used film and media in his classes, and today he's going to give us a sense of how the media has treated this topic in the past. Welcome, George.
It is great to be here.
Great to have you. So just a heads up, I'm going to ask everyone the same question first, because I think it will be interesting to see how everyone's answers are similar and different. So to kick this off, George, why do you think the search for life is important?
Okay. I'm going to go to Ray Bradbury, who discussed exploration of space in general, because as the space program was being developed in the 50s and the 60s, and especially into the 70s when people were getting bored with it, Bradbury talked about the importance of constantly expanding boundaries. And by boundaries, he was talking about boundaries of the mind, but he was also literally talking about physical boundaries. He thinks or thought that in order for humankind to survive, we've constantly got to be spreading ourselves out. We constantly have to be looking to the future. And I think that our search for intelligent life is doing what he talked about, is looking for those beings, whatever form they take, that are out there and are also intelligent.
Great. So in your experience, how has the relationship between alien life and human life been portrayed in film?
Okay. We can go, the first sci-fi film, or at least the first film that's recognized as sci-fi, is A Trip to the Moon by Georges Méliès, and that's really early in the history of film, around 1900. I can't remember exactly the year. And humans go to the moon and quickly get into a war with the moon people and outfox them and come back to Earth. It is an outlandish film. There's absolutely zero science to it, but Méliès was a magician before he became a filmmaker, and his magicianship really informed the way he made films. His films were meant to surprise and entertain, the same way a good magician does. Generally, things don't work out well between humans and aliens. Almost always, we are at odds with the aliens that we meet. Except for a couple of well-known films like E.T., The Extraterrestrial, and another film by Spielberg that I'm blanking on, so I won't go any farther with it, having to do with people getting in their heads this image of a mountain, which brings them to where there is a ship from friendly aliens. Almost always there are really bad results that come from humans and aliens together, even in relatively positive ones. Okay, I should have written all of these films in my head because my memory is awful. A 1950s film in which an alien comes to Earth and then gets shot almost immediately. And he's there basically to tell Earthlings, look, you've got a lot of power now, and we're going to let you survive. But the minute you start moving beyond the constraints of your solar system, be prepared, because we'll just wipe you out. And that was about as good as it got. You and I were talking about small life, very simple life that becomes larger. And as I was looking for examples of that, I was really surprised by how little there was on that topic. I hunted and hunted for films and literature on those films. And I did find one good article. And if anyone's interested, let me know and I will pass the information on to you by email. The title of it is Life and Why We're Fascinated with Sci-Fi Films That Present Aliens as a Threat. Wow, they are always a threat. So the short answer is we don't make out well.
So historically speaking, what kinds of things inspire popular themes in these kinds of movies, in your opinion?
Okay. I'm going to go back to a relatively early film theorist, someone from the 1930s named Siegfried Kracauer. And Kracauer wrote a book called From Caligari to Hitler, Caligari being a horror fantasy film, silent. It was considered the first of the German expressionist films. And he did a history of what happened in Germany based on the films that were popular in Germany. And he proposed a theory that you learn a great deal about society by studying the films that succeed in that society. And his argument is multi-layered. A lot of it most people don't buy into today, but the one that has stuck with us is one that makes a great deal of sense. People in the film industry invest in films because they like to make films and because they like to make money. And if, in fact, a film is not likely to make much money, then they're not going to invest in it. So what we see happening in films, some would say far too often, is some film comes along and really grabs the zeitgeist of the period. And then other films just like it are made over and over and over again until the return on them gets smaller and smaller, at which point something else comes along. And following Krakauer's logic, if you want to know what we're thinking, what we're dreaming, what terrifies us, look at the movies.
Mm-hmm.
I would say today you could also talk about looking at comic books, looking at television, looking at what are really successful fiction publications. Because whatever it is that draws us to those hugely successful pieces of media is something that's very much on our minds.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Go ahead.
That's really interesting. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. We have so many people to talk to. So thank you so much for joining this panel. It's been great talking to you over the summer, and now.
I am so sorry I took so long on my question.
Oh, no, it's okay. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So now I would like to switch gears a little bit and start a discussion on the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. I would like to introduce next Dr. Jill Tarter, who is an American astronomer and is best known for her work for the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. In fact, she was the director of the Center for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or SETI, and she was the model for Jodie Foster's character in the film Contact. So welcome, Jill. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Grace.
Thank you. So just a reminder, I'm going to ask everyone the same question first, and that is, why do you find the search for extraterrestrial life important?
Well, humans really always try and figure out how they fit in, right? And in this context of where are we in the scheme of a huge cosmos? Are we ordinary? Are we extraordinary? How do we calibrate ourselves relative to the cosmos? And I think that's what we're trying to do as we look for evidence of life beyond Earth.
Yeah, I think so too. So what kinds of things do you find exciting, and what kinds of things do you find worrisome about finding extraterrestrial intelligence?
Well, exciting is that it answers probably one of the oldest questions that humanity has. Are we alone? Is there life beyond Earth? And this question's been around for so long, so it has to be important, right? We would have given up on it if it weren't something that we were very much concerned about. So I'm really excited because over my career, there have been two amazing game changers. The first is exoplanets. The second is extremophiles, right? So exoplanets, planets that orbit stars other than our sun, are everywhere. There are more planets than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy that we had no idea about a couple of decades ago. And now we know they're there, and we're beginning to have some tools to try and study them. And the tools will get better very quickly. And then extremophiles, it's kinds of life that live in places which, when I was a student, I was told could never host any kind of biology. It would be absolutely impossible to live in frozen in ice or around the hot black smokers at the bottom of the oceans. And yet we find life abundant. So it tells me that it's probably going to be the case that life is elsewhere. And of course, the moment that we find a second example, one that isn't related to us, we know that life is going to be ubiquitous. So in physics, you count 1 to infinity.
Very good. Do you find anything worrisome about finding extraterrestrial intelligence?
Yes, that we might damage it, right? That we might act in an inappropriate manner with respect to it. We're looking at Mars, and we're looking at these recurrent slope linii, these places that seasonally wet and then dry, and wondering if there could be life there, extant life, not just evidence of extinct life, and wondering how we should conduct our exploration of Mars going forward. Should we in fact think about leaving Mars to the Martians? And that's it's an existential question.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have talked before about this project to search for extraterrestrial intelligence being a very long process, and it may be even multi-generational. Would you mind sharing your thoughts on that?
Well, we're actually searching in the SETI program for extraterrestrial technology. We're no better at defining intelligence or finding it raw than anyone else, but we are looking for evidence of someone else's technology. And that, if you just think about electromagnetic signals, there's 9 different parameters that we have to search through. And when you try and make an estimate of how big this multidimensional volume is that we might need to search in order to be successful, or to be have done such a significant search that we know that a negative answer could be justified. This volume, when I calculated, I said, okay, let's set that equal to the volume of all the world's oceans. And how much of that have we searched? Well, when SETI was 50 years old, the answer was 1 glass of water out of the ocean. At age 60, it's more like a small hot tub. But that gives you an indication that the search might necessarily be vast and might take a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. What kinds of entertainment have inspired your career path?
Well, I read an enormous amount of science fiction as a young person. In fact, I had a cat named Petronius in honor of a wonderful story called The Door into Summer. This cat lived with its master in an old shack, drafty place where it rained a lot, and the cat would want to go out and it would go to a door. The door would be open, it would be raining. The cat would then go to another door, expecting when that door was open that it wouldn't be raining. And I that just was like the personality of one of my cats. So I really did enjoy science fiction as a young person, still do. But I'm less happy with the fact that it's merging more into fantasy than good hard science-related science fiction.
Yeah. So talk more about that. What kinds of science fiction do you think get people to pursue or inspire people to pursue STEM fields?
Well, I think things that aren't so far in the future, things that have components and technology that a young person can relate to, and it's just a slight stretch. So it's keeping them in more comfortable territory and letting them imagine, oh, I could do that. And I could actually make it better. And that's an interesting question. And I didn't know these tools existed. And wow, I'd really like to learn how to do that. That's the kind of thing I enjoy. I think other people enjoy just throwing the universe wide open and thinking of totally unimaginable ideas within today's technology.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So the search for extraterrestrial life has been depicted a lot in science, in entertainment. What are people's biggest misconceptions about what that process is like and what you actually do in reality?
Well, because a movie is finite in length, I think we often give the impression that first contact will happen, and then understanding will happen, and then consequences will happen, and it'll all go bang, bang, bang. I think that in reality, because we're dealing with an other, it's going to take quite a long time to understand and interpret correctly what it is we've discovered, and then try and understand how information can be exchanged between us and something else.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know you've talked before a little bit about there being some ambiguity if we found something. Would you mind talking about that a little?
Yeah, we're going to go looking at the atmospheres of exoplanets, and we're going to go looking for evidence of someone else's technology, and we're probably going to be surprised. Recently, we've been trying to figure out whether phosphine gas in the clouds of Venus, right, our next door neighbor, actually has any relevance to biology. When you produce phosphine on Earth, it usually has a biological component. Looks like we got the wrong gas. We identified it wrong. But now we also have these geysers from the surface of Europa and Enceladus. And when we finally have missions that can fly through those plumes and we find organic molecules, are we going to be able to know whether biology was involved or just organic chemistry?
Interesting thought. Thank you so much, Jill. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Pleasure, Grace.
Thank you. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about some space missions that are involved with the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. I would like to reintroduce Tracy Drain, who is the lead flight systems engineer for the Europa Clipper mission, and she has worked for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory for over 20 years, testing, developing, and operating spacecraft to explore the solar system. She's going to help us bridge the gap a little bit between the search for extraterrestrial life far away and close to home. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you very much. I almost got a promotion to doctor. I know.
Sorry.
No worries.
So why do you think the search for extraterrestrial life is important?
I'm so glad you're asking everyone this question. It's cool to hear the different answers. And I completely agree with Jill that it's a very old answer. And I think that even if the life that we find isn't intelligent life, but it's just like microbial life on Europa, for example, humans are so contentious. We're so clannish, and we find so many reasons to like argue with each other and like be all focused on our differences. But I think whenever we find life someplace else that's out there, it'll be something that will be super unifying. We'll realize how much more we have in common versus the things that we find out there. I hope that doesn't make us then be all contentious with that thing, but we'll focus on the positive unifying aspect of it.
So Jill talked a little bit about her work in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. How does your work relate to that effort?
Yeah, I love that Jill mentioned exoplanets and Kepler, which is a mission that I got to work on for a couple of years. There's this equation called the Drake equation, if people haven't heard of it. And it's this way of estimating how many active intelligent civilizations there might be out there. And it has things like what's the rate of star formation and how many planets might be around each star and how many planets of those might be habitable, and you keep adding up all these fractions and multiplying them together to get some kind of estimate at the end. And historically, all of those things have been complete guesses, but the Kepler mission was a way of trying to really find out how common are planets in our galaxy. Are they common? Are they rare? How many are habitable? And as Jill pointed out, from that mission and now follow-on missions like TESS, scientists have been able to determine that the galaxy is literally bursting with planets. There are billions and billions of planets out there, which really just is a bit of a game changer in terms of our understanding of the possibilities.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So bringing things a little closer to home, you currently work on the Europa Clipper mission. What does that moon of Jupiter have to do with the search for life?
Yeah. So Jill also talked about extremophiles, which is a great tie into this moon behind me, a very beautiful jewel moon called Europa. It is the fourth largest moon of Jupiter. It's a little bit smaller than the Earth's moon, but scientists have some pretty good evidence that under this shell of ice that you can see behind me, there is a lot of water, huge amounts of water, more than twice all the water of the oceans combined. And scientists are wondering on this moon like Europa that has warmth in the inside, and it's really just caused by the fact that the moon is going around Jupiter. Sometimes it's closer, sometimes it's farther away because the orbit isn't completely circular. And so you get difference in gravitational pulls on it, which is like squishing and releasing it, which produces a lot of frictional heat inside, which then melts a lot of that ice into water. And down at the rock-water interface, you have what might be similar to environments that we have on the Earth, where you get these hydrothermal vents coming up that are heated by the Earth's interior, mixing with the water. And if all the elements are there that are necessary for life as we know it, Jim, like carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, this lovely acronym called CHNOPS, then you have this place where there's water, where there's chemistry, where there's energy, and stability is another big one. We think Europa has been like that for like 4 billion years. So if you have the right conditions and enough time, maybe life could have evolved down there. And that's one of the things that scientists are dying to find out. And the mission that I work on, Europa Clipper, is going to orbit Jupiter, but do lots of flybys of the moon Europa and help scientists get the data to understand things like how thick is the ice, how deep is the water, like what is the surface composition. Maybe we will get to fly through one of those plumes and use instruments to determine what the composition of the water plumes are. So all sorts of cool stuff going on in that spot, which is basically in our solar system backyard.
That's so cool. So you clearly work on a lot of missions that have a focus on searching for extraterrestrial life. Why do you like working on those kinds of missions?
I love it because in general, I like working on exploration missions because we as engineers get to get the scientists the information they need to answer these big questions that they have. And then when they find out the answers, like we usually get to like sit at the front of the class and hear what they're learning first. So it's really cool to get to contribute to just the expansion of human knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Jill also mentioned how the search for life is a multi-generational project. What is your take on that?
I completely agree with that. And not just because when we're talking about extraterrestrial intelligent life, but even when we're talking about microbial life, the things that we have to do are challenging and they take a long time, and the missions that we have build on each other. I was born in the, so I was kind of a baby when the Voyager missions were launching and doing their thing. And that was the first opportunity we had to see these big gas giants close up and discover more about their moons. So Voyagers flew by and the scientists came up with more questions. Galileo mission orbited Jupiter and also studied the moons of Jupiter and gave us more questions. Like I think the moons that it saw in detail gave the scientists so many more surprises than they were expecting. And now we're going to send Europa Clipper out there in order to study more from orbit. And ultimately someday we hope to do landing. So even just studying the Jupiter system has taken multiple decades-long missions in a row to continue refining our knowledge of what's out there. So it is important to think of it as a long-term activity. And, unfortunately, we all can't live forever. So we end up needing to train up young scientists and engineers and a variety of other people participating in these missions, which is one of the reasons why I like interacting with students and mentoring people like yourself. It's been such a joy to talk you through this whole research project this whole time and watch you get to play in this world and explore a topic like exobiology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so grateful for all your mentorship over the years. Right. So you are part of the planning committee for the Science and Entertainment Exchange. Why do you think it's important to have an intersection between entertainment and scientists and engineers?
There are so many reasons. Some of them are just because it's super fun. But I think the biggest one is that people, like it or not, get a lot of their knowledge and information about science and technology from the entertainment that they watch. And while people know that it's fictional, sometimes that stuff just seeps into you. And even without you realizing, you get an unconscious view of, oh, this is how that works. And so I think while we're at it, we might as well introduce some real science and technology into the things that people are going to be exposed to. And it can be really cool. A lot of times science or truth is more weird than fiction could be. And so if there's real science and technology that you can use that still serves your story, it seems like it's really kind of a best of both worlds thing going on. And since a lot of us were heavily inspired to do what we're doing by all the really cool things that people in the entertainment industry have done, it goes back to the thing that you mentioned earlier. Sometimes having really juicy, interesting science and technology will help inspire the future generation to want to do this kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, my last question for you is, what do you wish people knew more about your work?
Oh, what do I wish people knew? I think, especially for young people, I wish people knew that engineers, especially systems engineers, aren't just locked in a room by ourselves, like developing widgets. They have this impression, oh, your job must be so boring. But the kind of job that I do, where we're making sure all the different parts of the spacecraft, thermal, power, telecom, all work together to get a mission to work, requires lots and lots of interaction with people and lots of learning every day and lots of really creative problem solving. And that's a thing that I think people don't always think about when they think about engineering. So it's a much more creative, all over the place interacting job that is huge, like almost illegal amounts of fun to do a job like this.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tracy. I appreciate your participation.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Grace.
All right, now I'd like to talk a little bit more about a mission in the works that is looking for signs of past life. I'd like to introduce Rob Locke, who has worked for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory for 32 years on concepts, development, and flight operations for missions to Venus, Mars, asteroids, Jupiter, Europa, and Enceladus. He's also spent much of the last decade on the Mars exploration program, serving as one of the mission architects, which is also leading up to the current Mars sample return program. Welcome, Rob.
Oh, hi, Grace. I hope you guys can hear me. Thanks for the opportunity to work with you this summer. It's been loads of fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
I'm enjoying the other panelists too. This is really exciting.
Me too. So, Rob, why do you think the search for extraterrestrial life is important?
Goes back to my childhood. I was born in the early 60s and had the opportunity to be exposed to, science fiction from that era. Just as Jill mentioned, the book she mentioned is one of my favorites by one of my favorite authors. And I read it too, and I just got completely sucked into all the speculative fiction talking about, discovering life, interacting with life, the social interactions. But at the same time, I was also reading about Captain Cook and the British explorations, to discovering our own world and the crazy scientific, exciting things that they found then. And then I was also exposed to, the ascent of man, anthropology. How did we grow from, basic mammals up to intelligence? Mm-hmm. And then also, what could happen out in the world? So Carl Sagan's out there telling us about all this while I'm a very young, impressionable person. So it really sort of underscored that the questions are important, but also the way we deal with those questions. We always benefit from the exploration of science and engineering here on Earth, even when we're looking outward. It's just an exciting way to go do science and engineering.
Yeah, I agree. So would you mind giving us a brief overview of the Mars Sample Return Program for context?
You bet. Here's the elevator version. This has been going on for 30 or 40 years, but what we're trying to do now is collect samples on Mars, which is happening, this month with Perseverance on Mars. They'll be collecting samples for the first time, intending to bring them back. In future missions, later in this decade, a lander will go to Mars to pick up those samples They will carry perhaps a rover to pick them up off the surface, or have Perseverance deliver them, or perhaps even both. They will put them on a small rocket that's, about 10 feet tall, and send the samples up in a sort of basketball-shaped container up into the orbit of Mars, where another spacecraft, an orbiter, right now the concept is built by ESA, our partner in Mars sample return, to bring the samples back to Earth. And the key point of all this is, after all this UPS delivery service is done, the samples will get to go to laboratories around the Earth to do the kinds of science we could never afford to fit on vehicles to send to Mars. So we'll learn orders of magnitude more about Mars by looking at samples than what we could possibly do sending instruments on rovers to Mars. So it's very exciting for all the planetary scientists and even other types of scientists to get the chance to look at Mars material up close and deduce whether life was ever there, whether it was truly habitable as they think it was, and sort of explore the history of Mars and why it might have had life and may not have life today. So there's a huge number of questions that can be answered through sample return.
That's so exciting. Thank you for sharing that with us. I know one of the big parts of sample return is forward and backward contamination. Could you explain those things a little bit?
Yeah, in the 60s, people started getting concerned that, we might export life to planets we visit. And if there's life on those planets, ours may corrupt the science we could do to understand that life. And also, if there is life there, if we bring it back, if we get the opportunity to bring it back, we didn't want to just let it loose in our biosphere. We've had plenty of examples of natural disasters or unnatural disasters of humans bringing life from one place to another and having it really kind of destroy ecosystems. So there's the space treaties of the 60s were signed. And so the two major things we think about are forward contamination, and we consider that to be forward planetary protection. That's kind of the term we use in the office here and used in documents at NASA and ESA and other places, where we're trying to avoid bringing Earth microbes to Mars and Europa and other places so that they don't destroy the scientific investigations of those places looking for life and habitability. And then backward planetary protection is concerned with preventing backward contamination so that if we want to look at samples from Mars, we're not letting that Mars material just wander around the Earth anywhere. We're keeping it in a secure laboratory environment so we can do all that learning without letting it loose in our ecosystem. We don't think there's life there, but we don't want to take the chance. But we also don't want to pollute it with Earth life. We want to keep it locked away from the Earth and vice versa, so that we can do good science, so we can understand what is true about what we're trying to learn.
So what will happen with those samples when they do return to Earth?
Well, the whole idea is to keep them secure, take them into laboratory environments where we can extract the sample tubes from the machines that brought them back to the Earth, take a look at them, make sure that they don't pose a threat, and then start a scientific process by which some of the samples get to move to various laboratories around the Earth. And this is an international mission, so it'll be a global enterprise of doing scientific study across a broad level. There's physics and geology and chemistry and biology and a whole bunch of other scientific topics that will be investigated, and it'll be a giant process that will play out in the 2030s of trying to get some investigation done. And one of the key things that they did with, say, the lunar science on the lunar rocks is they'll keep some of it back for future science. We learn so much all the time that, the scientific discoveries of 10 or 20 years from now, we want to be able to apply new techniques to those things over time. So there's an immediacy of people wanting to answer specific questions right now. And then there's also the reserves of how do we then save some of that material and save some inquiry for secondary questions or brand new questions that we could ask of those samples in the future.
That's really interesting. I'm glad we do that. So what kinds of things do you wish everyday people knew about your job?
I'm going to have to echo Tracy. Planetary science is a team sport, and it's teams of teams. For every kind of problem, there's a whole bunch of people who can contribute to the problem. Diversity of thought and intellectual viewpoint is huge in planetary science. There are different science, different engineering, different social aspects to the way we approach the problems that are really important to finding efficient solutions, creative solutions. In my own history as a young engineer at JPL, it was part of my job to elicit the creative solutions among the engineers and scientists and sort of find the most useful solutions based on all that creativity. What's possible to do with these engineering systems versus what kinds of questions are we asking, and can we, sort of squeeze out extra investigation whenever we can? And so across planetary science, it is just, teams on teams and teams of people and their communication and their enthusiasm and what each individual can bring in training and creativity and enthusiasm to the enterprise.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Rob. I've really enjoyed talking to you. And
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Now I would like to introduce Dan Wilner, who is an LA-based writer working across film, TV, theater, and fiction. In his work, he explores the intersections between queerness, spirituality, and the mystical. In our conversation over the summer, he gave me insight into how and why a writer can incorporate science themes. And so we will explore that now. So Dan, why do you think the search for extraterrestrial life is important?
Well, Grace, thank you so much for having me and for what you're doing. I think the search for life for me really reveals our yearning to connect. I think that this pandemic has really brought that before our eyes and our hearts, just our need as a species to be together. And I think that our search for life collectively sort of reveals that we hold that not just individually, but also kind of as a collective consciousness. And I think that's really powerful and poignant. And I think it is sort of when I really kind of get deep into what might be driving that, it's almost like this, that in our heart, we really hold life to be sacred. We really, I think, know that life is mysterious and miraculous. And I think that there's a way, even as we go outward, searching for life beyond our planet, there's a way to ground even more deeply in that intention back at home, and to treat all of life back at home as sacred, which I think we're all recognizing is sort of not just a moral imperative, but a biological one for us now.
That's really interesting. I like that. So in the context of extraterrestrial life, in your opinion, what has been missed or underplayed in the entertainment industry?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. So, I mean, I think, George talked about this a little bit. I think we've had several generations of incredible depictions of alien life that are kind of forms that perhaps we can identify based on what we're familiar with here on Earth, whether it's kind of little green men and women, whether it's sort of creatures that look like deep sea monsters or insects. I think that card's pretty played out. And I think we're moving into a kind of more interesting, rich, speculative terrain, almost the unknown, and forms that might seem more strange and kind of exciting and perhaps terrifying to us. So I think of a movie like Arrival, which directed by Denis Villeneuve, where even the physical form of the alien being is pretty unlike anything we're familiar with here on Earth. And then their consciousness is even more trippy, where they seem to sort of have knowledge across time, even though they function within time, and their language kind of reflects that and expresses that. So I think that's a really interesting and provocative example. And I think we can go even further. So I love how what Jill explained about, extremophiles, and Tracy touched on this too. And I think there can be some very interesting speculative terrain to start entering, to start wondering what could be some very strange forms of life at the microbial or even kind of nanoscale level that could do some very strange things that we would find, perhaps that we might not even be able to recognize as a physical phenomenon, but that might exhibit certain quantum phenomena that might give rise to really strange forms of consciousness that might affect our consciousness in really weird, mystical ways. I just think that in this era where more and more people are sort of exploring these topics and engaging in things like meditation, contemplation, and really asking this question of like, what is mind? What is this mind? I think that it's a really exciting time to bring that forward. And finally, and this is just my own hobby horse as a queer filmmaker, I would just like to see more queer characters in sci-fi and also women characters. Just look at this panel. I mean, you and Tracy and Jill. I mean, this is just, it's wonderful. And in terms of representation, more BIPOC characters. I think that, you know, we all have really interesting perspectives on this question of what is life. And I also think that we all sort of live an example of sort of resilience and perseverance and creativity that is required in this search for life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So in your own writing, how do you balance scientific accuracy with the demands of dramatic storytelling?
Yeah, so Margaret Atwood, who of course is a great master of the science fiction genre, has this wonderful instruction to writers where she says, your number one job is to hold my attention. So that has to be, you know, as it were, the prime directive for us all. And yet I have found working with scientists and engineers from the exchange, you know, they like to say, we're not the accuracy police. You know, we're not here to just kind of hold you to the textbook understanding. They really have worked with me in very pragmatic ways. And as everybody on this panel has said, everybody's already a fan of sci-fi. And so people want to tell really cool and exciting and engaging stories and work to find ways to kind of massage the science so that it's plausible enough so that folks kind of go on the trip with you. I also think there's a really interesting case where maybe there isn't sometimes as much of a conflict, where if you think of a movie like Interstellar, written, directed by Christopher Nolan, because of his really close collaboration with Kip Thorne, the great physicist, you know, that movie felt really scientifically grounded in the first 2/3. And I think what that did is kind of earned our trust so that when Nolan kind of takes us into this really trippy sort of meta fifth dimensional space, whatever that is, physicalizing time is sort of not really clear. It's this very kind of mystical, very emotional kind of world. I think we're willing to go on that ride with him because he's earned our trust. And it's a really provocative and powerful way, I think, where Nolan kind of built a bridge between the world that we live in as we understand it to the world as it might be in some more kind of exhilarating conception. So I think that's a really cool example to follow.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like what you said about earning everyone's trust. So you mentioned that you've worked with the exchange in the past. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience with that?
Oh my God. I mean, I could speak for 5 panels about this. There's a part of me that's like, well, why do we have to look for the miracle of life off of this planet when we have it in people like Tracy Drain? You know, I mean, not only this badass engineer and running missions to the outer solar system, but just the kindest, most generous person alive, and really given so much of herself to connect me to, I don't know, 10 or 15 different scientists, engineers, other folks, just incredible. And then those folks introduced me to maybe 10 or 15 other people across different domains. And they gave so much of their time and expertise to teach me things and consult on the writing of scenes down to like little lines of dialogue. And it's just remarkable. And it's been such an enriching time for me. So I just encourage anybody who's even the slightest bit interested to just, plunge in. And I think, Grace, you're just such a great example. You know, you saw one thing, you were hooked, you just sort of said, hey, I'm here. Like, what can I do? And, they put you to work, and here we all are. So I think that's that I would just encourage anybody to just dive in.
Yeah. So you yourself have benefited from working with the exchange. Do you think that scientists and engineers can benefit from working with the entertainment industry?
Right. I mean, I don't want to make too grand a case for it, because for all I know, if scientists work with filmmakers, maybe it'll just make them more neurotic. I don't know. So I don't want to make too grandiose a case about it. But I guess when I reflect about the history of science, the history of kind of great scientific discoveries, I think that oftentimes we see a certain pattern where the scientist is sort of within the existing conceptual paradigm, the known understanding of, our physical universe, and they're wrestling with things right at the frontier of what's known or understood. And oftentimes what they're grappling with is certain kind of contradictions or anomalies, paradoxes that they kind of can't wrap their heads around. And invariably, that person has to make a kind of an imaginal leap to another model of the world that just nobody has imagined before. And that's just a very brave thing to do. And I think fundamentally, it's as much an intuitive and felt and almost embodied process as it is an intellectual one. So again, I don't know if scientists might be inspired by working with filmmakers to do that, but certainly I think that's what we all need, scientists to be doing for us to survive. So that at least is my hope.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. It was great talking to you.
Thank you, Grace. You're my hero.
All right. I think we've made it through all of our wonderful speakers today. Rick and Anne, back to you.
Thank you very much, Grace. And clearly you have a fan base. I think that's awesome. Okay. So thanks to all of our speakers, and thanks for all the encouragement that they've given Grace, because we couldn't have done this event without her. And we really appreciate your natural curiosity, and for everybody to be here to have you, because as Rick said, we didn't have audience questions this time. So you got to be the voice of the audience and ask all those questions.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was a wonderful experience, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you to everybody. And so we will be back. So next week we'll be sending an invitation out shortly. We have our speaker booked, and we'll get that out to you. But that will be the last event for what we're calling our summer season. Rick, is that it?
No, yeah, that's right. We're going to take a little break until the fall when we already have some ideas lined up. But Anne, are you going to tell them the behind the scenes craziness about next week's event?
What is the behind the scenes craziness?
We confirmed the speaker while this event was happening.
That's how we roll at the Exchange. It's like we're if we confirmed like 5 minutes before, that would have been noteworthy. But this is just an average day at the Exchange. So, but we will get that invitation out to you once we know what she's actually talking about, and send that off. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Bye.